By the time anyone realized the main generator was gone, the children's wing was already dark. Monitors went black. Ventilators coughed and died. Somewhere down the hall, a mother started screaming her baby's name. In the basement of St. Andrew's Hospital, knee-deep in rising water and the stench of burnt insulation, a 47-year-old maintenance man named Jack Merrill slammed his shoulder into a stuck steel door. His flashlight bobbed wildly. The building shuddered with thunder overhead. He could hear the code blue alarms echoing faintly through concrete and pipes. "Come on, old girl," he muttered to the metal, as if it could hear him. "Don't quit on me now." Behind that door was a panel no one else in the hospital even knew existed. A panel he'd wired himself on his own time with, parts the accountants had refused to approve. Not in the budget, they'd said. Not your job, they'd said. Upstairs executives were on the phone with the power company, with insurance, with lawyers. Down here, Jack Merrill was the only thing standing between a flooded basement and a row of silent ICU beds. He drew in a breath, braced his boots against the slick floor, and yanked that door with everything he had left. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. Now, to understand how a man like that ends up alone in the dark holding a whole hospital on his back, we've got to rewind a bit. Most days, Jack Merrill didn't look like anybody's hero. By day, he pushed a squeaky yellow cart down the halls of a worn-down hospital in Dayton, Ohio, fixing leaky faucets and flickering lights for people who barely remembered his name. His badge said facilities technician, but everybody just called him maintenance or hey buddy. 47 years old, widowed, raising a 16-year-old son named Caleb in a rented duplex that always smelled faintly of laundry detergent and cold pizza. What nobody saw under the faded navy work shirt and the scuffed steel toes was the past he tried to bury. Before his wife's cancer, before the medical bills swallowed their savings, Jack had been an aerospace systems engineer out in Houston. He used to design fail-safe systems for spacecraft, backup redundancy for the redundancies. Then one night a friend died in a launch pad fire Jack had warned his bosses about. The report said unforeseen systems failure. Jack knew better. They'd ignored the memos, cut corners, rolled the dice. He walked away from that world and never looked back. But he never stopped seeing weak points. In elevators that jerked too hard. In old wiring that ran hot behind plaster. In the way St. Andrew's Hospital ran on a single aging generator that shook every time it kicked on. He kept his head down, took the night shift when he could, so he could be home after school for Caleb, and tried to make peace with a smaller life. Fix what's in front of you, his late wife used to say. So he did. One broken outlet, one clogged drain at a time. Still, the engineer in him wouldn't shut up. On lunch breaks, he'd sit in a forgotten storage room off the boiler level, sketching out a low-cost backup grid for the hospital on scraps of cardboard, using off-the-shelf inverters' battery arrays, a scavenged rooftop solar bank they never bothered to hook up right. A way to keep the critical wings alive, even if the main generator failed. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't corporate. But it would work. The only person he ever showed those drawings to was Caleb, who'd swing his legs off an overturned bucket and say, "You're still a rocket scientist, Dad," with that half smile that made the long shifts worth it. Then, one Monday, in late September, everything changed. A new chief operating officer swept into St. Andrew's sharp suit. Sharper smile, big promises about efficiency and modernizing the infrastructure. Town hall meetings, PowerPoints, words like streamlining and cost centers. 3 days later, Jack watched from the back of the cafeteria as the COO clicked to a slide labeled Emergency Power Upgrade. The hospital had just signed a lucrative contract with a flashy tech company from out of state to install a state-of-the-art smart generator system. Jack's stomach dropped. On the screen, he saw the exact same basic concept he'd been quietly sketching in the boiler room for months, right down to the way the old rooftop panels were being repurposed. Only there was one big problem under all that sleek software and sales talk. He could see a fatal flaw in the way they'd wired the backup switches. And nobody in that room wanted to hear it. The first signs of trouble didn't come with thunder or alarms. They came with memos. 3 days after that shiny cafeteria presentation, Jack found a bright orange notice taped to his workshop door in the basement. Unauthorized equipment storage. Remove immediately. Under it, in smaller type, report deviations to facilities management. He stared at the paper for a long moment, the words swimming in the yellow glow of the flickering hallway light. Inside the room sat nothing but his toolbox, a portable vise, and a stack of city code books he'd bought secondhand. All legal, all harmless, all used to keep this hospital running when vendor contractors didn't show or when budgets ran out at quarter's end. By noon, 2 administrators he'd never met showed up with clipboards and forced smiles, talking around him like he wasn't in the room. We're standardizing maintenance workflows. We'll need an itemized list of all personal modifications you've made to hospital property. Don't worry, this is just a cleanup measure. Nothing personal. But it wasn't nothing, and it wasn't clean. They wanted to know what he'd touched, what he'd wired, whether he'd done anything off protocol. And every time he answered honestly, they scribbled faster, as if building a case he couldn't see. By the time they left, the workshop felt smaller, like they'd sucked the air out of it. That evening, while he was fixing a warped door frame in pediatrics, he overheard a group of supervisors whispering in the hallway. The COO said he's a liability if he keeps poking around. Apparently, he thinks the new generator's wiring is unsafe. Maintenance techs don't get to decide what's safe. A soft chuckle. One of these days, he's going to rewire something and blow the place up. Jack didn't correct them, didn't look up. He just sanded the door jamb with slow, deliberate strokes, the grit whispering against the wood. But his ears burned, half with anger, half with shame. Not shame for what he'd done, but for how small they made him feel for caring. When his shift ended at midnight, he trudged out to the parking lot, rain pooling in the cracked asphalt, around his old pickup at the far edge of the employee section. Caleb sat in the passenger seat with a textbook open, waiting for him like always. "You're late, Dad." "Sorry," Jack said, turning the key. They needed the West Wing door fixed. Caleb tilted his head, studying him. "You okay?" Jack forced a smile. "Just tired." But Caleb wasn't fooled. "Is it the new guy?" "The suit." Jack glanced over. His son's voice had that same quiet sharpness his late wife once had the ability to see through him without trying. "Don't worry about it," Jack said gently. "Just work stuff. You always say that when something's wrong." He didn't answer. The next morning, the hospital announced the rollout schedule for the new smart generator system. Posters in every hallway. Email alerts in all staff inboxes. A big countdown clock in the main lobby. Power upgrade launch, 12 days. That afternoon, the COO himself, Tom Nolan, found Jack repairing a supply closet hinge and cornered him with the kind of smile that never touched the eyes. "Jack Wright. Listen, I hear you've had some concerns about our upgrade." Jack wiped his hands on a rag. "Just thought someone should look at the wiring diagram again." "Oh, our contractors are the best in the country, fully certified. Nothing to worry about." Nolan leaned in. "And I need you to stop spreading doubts. We can't have staff panicking over rumors." No one's panicking, Jack said. I just want to make sure everything's safe before... Leave the engineering to the engineers, Nolan snapped, smile gone now. Your department has one job: keep the lights on until the new system goes live. After that, we reevaluate staffing needs. There it was, the real message. Jack stepped back, rag clenched in his fist. Is that a threat? Nolan's expression shifted into a polished corporate calm. A friendly reminder. We all have roles here. He walked away before Jack could say another word. For the rest of the day, Jack moved mechanically through his tasks, tightening a railing, replacing a cracked tile, cleaning out a drain in the staff lounge. Every few minutes, he wiped sweat from his forehead, though the hallways were cool. His heart beat too fast. His hands shook as he reassembled a faucet. He didn't tell Caleb about the encounter that night. He cooked boxed macaroni, asked about school-forced jokes, until his son laughed. They watched half a baseball game before Caleb finally went upstairs. Only when the house was silent did Jack let the weight settle onto his shoulders. If Nolan pushed him out, they'd lose the health insurance, the house, Caleb's chance at the honors program next year. Everything. But the deeper worry gnawed harder. He knew the wiring flaw. He'd seen it buried in the presentation renderings, an auto-switch system that could overload if the old wiring wasn't fully replaced. And he'd overheard a purchasing manager grumbling about budget overruns. They weren't replacing everything. If the system failed on a storm night, if the ICU lost power, if pediatrics lost power. Jack pressed both hands to his face. His past wouldn't let him ignore it. Not after Houston. Not after losing a friend because people in suits thought cutting corners was good business. At the end of the week, he took a risk he hated taking. He went to risk management. He laid out everything calmly, no accusations, no emotion. Just the technical concern, the potential cascade failure, the recommendation to review the install schematics before activation. The director barely looked at him. We follow vendor guidelines. If you have issues with their engineering, take it up with them. I tried, Jack said quietly. They told me to stay in my lane. Well, maybe do that, the director said, already reaching for the next file. That afternoon, he returned to the workshop to find a note taped to the door again. Off limits until further notice. Inside, his tools were gone. All of them. Wrenches, testers, wire strippers, even the old metal lockbox his wife had given him the year they married, every last piece of his life's work emptied out and taken to storage for review. He stood in the hollow room listening to the steady drip of a leaking pipe nearby. It took him a moment to realize the sound wasn't the pipe. It was his own breathing, ragged in the quiet. When he got home that evening, Caleb was already at the kitchen table doing homework. He looked up, eyes widening. Dad, where's your toolbox? Jack hesitated. In storage. Why new policy? Caleb swallowed. Did you do something wrong? The question hit harder than anything the COO had said. No, Jack said, soft but firm. I did the opposite of wrong, but it doesn't always matter. Caleb stared at him for a moment, then looked down at his hands. They don't listen to you because you're maintenance. Jack sat across from him, feeling that familiar twist of pain. It's not about the title. Caleb looked up again. Then what is it about Jack didn't have an answer. 2 nights later, the mistreatment escalated. Jack arrived for shift only to find himself reassigned to non-essential zones, barred from basement levels and mechanical access rooms. His card wouldn't open half the doors he used daily. While he was mopping a spill near radiology, a task far below his normal duties, he overheard 2 nurses chatting. The COO basically said the old maintenance guy was sabotaging things. Seriously, yeah. They're keeping him away from the new installation because he might interfere. Jack froze mid-mop. Sabotaging things. Interfere. Dangerous. A lie repeated often enough starts sounding like truth. That night, Caleb found him sitting on the edge of his bed, still wearing his work boots, staring at the floor. "Dad, what's going on?" Jack rested his elbows on his knees. "They think I'm in the way." Caleb stepped closer. "You're the one who keeps that place running." Jack shook his head. "Doesn't matter. People see what they want to see. They're wrong, I know. But you're not gonna let them mess with your job, right? We need this." The way his son said we stirred something deep. A mix of pride and fear. "I'm not letting anything happen to us," Jack said, but he wasn't sure it was true anymore. The tension reached its breaking point 4 days before launch. Jack was replacing light bulbs in a conference room. Another insult assignment when the door opened and COO Nolan stepped in with a security officer, Jack Merrill. Nolan said, voice smooth as glass, "We've had reports of you accessing restricted mechanical areas without authorization." "That's not true," Jack replied, straightening slowly. Nolan held out a printout. "Door logs say otherwise." Jack glanced at the paper. The timestamp matched the night he'd brought risk management a schematic. He'd gone through a basement corridor to reach their office after hours. The violation had been visiting the only department that should have listened. "That wasn't unauthorized," Jack said. "I was reporting Nolan cut him off. We're issuing a formal warning. One more breach and your employment here will be terminated." The security officer just stared at him, arms crossed, waiting to see if Jack would make trouble. Jack felt something cold and heavy settle in his chest. Not fear, not anger, finality. They were boxing him in, stripping away access credibility and finally his ability to protect the place or the people inside. After the two men left, Jack stood alone in the humming conference room, the new LED lights glaring overhead. He didn't move. He didn't breathe for a long moment. Then his phone buzzed. A text from Caleb. "Hey, Dad. Big storm coming tonight. You working late? Do you want me to stay up?" Jack stared at the words. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Inside, the countdown clock in the lobby ticked closer to the upgrade. The storm was coming. And so was everything he'd feared. The storm arrived like a living thing. By sunset, the sky over Dayton had gone the color of bruised steel. Trees bowed in the wind. Power lines snapped and sparked on back roads. The Weather Service upgraded the alert twice in an hour, then again. The kind of storm nobody forgets, not because of the rain, but because of the timing. It hit the city on the exact night St. Andrew's Hospital began the final calibration for its new smart generator system. Jack Merrill felt it, before he saw it deep in his bones, the way some people feel earthquakes. As he stepped out of the pickup and into the staff entrance, his phone lit up with weather warnings. He shoved it back into his pocket and hurried inside. Every beat of thunder felt like a countdown. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the basement tonight. His badge wouldn't open the doors. His toolbox was still locked in storage. He'd been reassigned to the upper floors for routine sanitation. That was the plan. Keep him away. Keep him quiet. Keep him from seeing what they were really doing. But storms didn't care about plans. By 9 p.m., the lights flickered for the first time. Just once. A dip, barely noticeable. But to Jack, it landed like a punch. The building had shuddered. That should never happen. He was in the hallway outside imaging when it happened again, this time longer, like a breath held too long. Machines hiccuped. Nurses paused. The air conditioning stuttered before kicking back on. Voices rose. People whispered. Someone said the word generator, and the room went still. Then the power died. Everything went black. For half a heartbeat, a vacuum of silence swallowed the entire hospital. Then emergency lights flickered on, glowing a dim, uneasy red in every hallway. Jack didn't breathe. He didn't have to see the installation schematics. He already knew exactly what just failed. Someone shouted for help down the hall. A nurse sprinted past him. NICU's gone dark. They're losing heat and airflow. Someone call facilities. They're not answering. Where's the backup? Why isn't anything turning on? His badge buzzed in his pocket. A message from security. All staff remain where you are until further notice. Facilities is managing the issue. Do not enter basement levels. Facilities. There were only 5 people on that team tonight, most of them new hires brought in after the COO's restructuring. And none of them, not one, understood the skeleton of this building the way Jack did. He didn't think, didn't plan. His legs were already moving. Someone grabbed his arm. A nurse he knew from pediatrics. Jack. They said, "Stay put, I can't," he said. "You'll get written up, then they can fire me in the morning." He broke into a run. Down 2 flights of stairs, across a darkened rehab wing, past a maintenance sign taped on a door that didn't fool him for a second. He reached the elevator bank and hit the button for the basement. Nothing. Power dead. The little red light above the call panel flickered and died. Fine. He took the stairs. The stairwell was pitch black. No emergency lights down this far. The deeper he went, the hotter the air became thick, humid, carrying the metallic smell of overheating machinery. When he reached the landing for the mechanical level, his badge reader glowed a soft red. Access denied. He stared at it. Thunder rolled above the roof, rattling the metal railing under his hand. He pressed the badge again. Red. Again, red. He reached into his pocket and took out a small, flat-head screwdriver he kept on him, out of stubborn habit. He popped the reader's front plate loose, reached inside, and touched 2 wires together. The door unlocked with a soft click. Inside, chaos breathed. The hum of machinery was wrong, too high, too strained, like an engine pushed beyond its limits. Milky steam drifted across the concrete floor. The new generator's display panel blinked with error codes, a red warning light pulsing like a heartbeat. 3 contractors clustered around the main console, shouting over each other. "Try resetting the auto relay." I did. It's not cycling. It should have switched to auxiliary by now. Why isn't auxiliary loading? Because Jack thought the wiring flaw you ignored put both systems on the same load path. Because they cut corners. Because nobody listens to the guy with the mop bucket. He stepped toward them. One contractor noticed him and swore. Hey, you can't be down here, I need to see the schematic," Jack said. "Back off, man. This is restricted." A second man waved at him like shooing a stray dog. "Upstairs is handling this." "Upstairs doesn't know what's happening," Jack said, voice steady. "And if this doesn't switch over in the next 90 seconds, the pediatric ICU loses airflow completely." All 3 froze. One swallowed hard. How do you know that?" "Because I worked the Houston fire 12 years ago," Jack said. "I know also the smell of overheating insulation. I know the tone of an overworked inverter. And I know you wired your secondary relay wrong." The youngest contractor hesitated. The COO said, "I don't care what the COO said. Show me the panel." For 2 long seconds, nobody moved. Then the oldest contractor stepped aside. Jack knelt, yanked open the metal door, and saw it immediately. The auto-switch routing had been spliced to save on rewiring time. A single overloaded bridge was feeding both emergency circuits. One spark, and the whole system would melt from the inside out. His hands moved without hesitation. Years of muscle memory, the kind he thought he'd buried when he left Houston. He stripped wires with the edge of his screwdriver, rerouted load paths, uncoupled the dead bridge, and reset the thermal lockout. Behind him, someone muttered, "Holy hell! Is that safe?" "No," Jack said. "But it's safer than what you had." He twisted the last coupling, slammed the panel shut, and reached up to the bypass switch. "Stand back." They scrambled away. Jack pulled the lever. The generator coughed, stuttered, then roared back to life, louder than before, but stable. The air vents overhead shuddered as airflow surged through them again. One by one, emergency lights brightened down the hall. Upstairs, a cheer rippled through the building as power returned to critical areas. Jack exhaled. His whole body shook, but it wasn't over. The main screen flashed primary circuit offline. Manual restart required. If the primary circuit didn't come back up, the hospital would run on the shaky secondary power indefinitely, and if another surge hit or if the storm worsened, it would collapse again. The contractors looked at him. "What do we do?" Jack wiped sweat from his face with his sleeve. "Where's your supervisor?" "On a conference call with the COO." Of course he was. Jack stepped forward. "Then we do it ourselves." The oldest man nodded. "Tell us what to do." And there it was, the shift he never thought he'd see. 3 professionals, men with certifications and new equipment and corporate backing, looking to the janitor for direction. "Kill the autocycle," Jack said. "We're going analog." They moved fast, following his instructions, isolating the damaged module, manually resetting breakers in the correct sequence, checking each load path before re-establishing a stable flow. Jack crawled under consoles, hauling himself through a tangle of cables. His shirt soaked with sweat, his knuckles scraped raw, his lungs burning from the hot air. And every moment, one memory pushed him harder. His friend's face, the night before the Houston fire. The way he'd joked about corporate geniuses ignoring red flags. The way the investigation had called the explosion unforeseen. Jack would not let another building full of innocent people pay the price for somebody else's shortcuts. Not again. Not tonight. By the time they reached the final relay, alarms were beeping slower. The generator hummed at a more natural pitch. The storm above thrashed the roof like a fist, but the facility no longer trembled with it. Jack reached for the last breaker. "You ready?" he asked. The contractors nodded. He pushed it up. For a moment, just a moment, the room fell unnaturally quiet. Then the primary circuit roared alive. Lights surged to full power. Monitors blinked green. The vibration in the floor evened out, becoming a steady, controlled hum. Upstairs, cheers broke out again. Louder this time. The hospital had stabilized. One contractor clapped Jack on the shoulder. "Man, you just saved the whole damn building!" The youngest contractor shook his head in disbelief. "They told us you were causing trouble, that you were messing with the install." Jack looked at the main display screen, solid green across every metric. "I was trying to prevent trouble," he said quietly. Boots pounded on the metal stairs behind them. Security rushed in, first hands on radios. Behind them, face-pale hair soaked from rushing across the campus, stood the COO. "What the hell is he doing down here?" Nolan barked, pointing at Jack. "He is not authorized." The head contractor stepped forward. "With respect, sir," he said, voice steady. "If he hadn't been down here, we'd have lost half the hospital." Security hesitated. Jack didn't move, didn't gloat, didn't explain. He simply stood there, sweaty, scraped up, exhausted, watching the man who'd spent weeks dismantling his credibility stare at the stabilized generator like it had betrayed him. "What do you mean?" "He saved it," Nolan demanded. The contractor pointed at the open panels. Your wiring map was wrong. The auto relay failed because the circuits weren't fully separated. He rerouted the load manually and restarted the primary system. Nolan looked from the panel to Jack, struggling to form words. Before he could, another voice echoed down the stairwell. It was the pediatric ICU charge nurse, a woman who had never once remembered Jack's name until tonight. She ran in breathless. "We just got airflow back," she said. "You," she pointed directly at Jack, eyes filling with something dangerously close to tears. "I don't know what you did, but you saved those babies." Everyone looked at him then. Security, the contractors, the COO, a man they'd dismissed, ignored, sidelined, silenced. A man they'd forced into a corner. A man who'd stepped up anyway. And in that moment, hot, loud humming with the heartbeat of a building brought back from the edge, everything shifted. Not because he wanted praise, not because he wanted revenge, but because he'd done the one thing nobody else down here could have done. Jack Merrill had saved them. And the people who saw it would never look at him the same way again. For a long moment, no one moved. The basement hummed with the steady thrum of the restored power system, a deep living pulse that filled every inch of concrete and steel. The storm still raged outside, thunder cracking through the ventilation shafts, but down here the danger had passed. The hospital was breathing again, and everyone was staring at the man who had brought it back to life. Jack Merrill stood with one hand braced on the metal housing chest, rising and falling, sweat streaking through the dust on his face. He looked like someone who'd crawled through a furnace to drag a city out the other side. The charge nurse was the first to approach, still trembling from adrenaline, voice thick. "Whatever you did," she said, "you saved a room full of newborns tonight." Jack opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Not humility, not pride, just exhaustion. The kind that settles deep like an old debt being paid off in full. One of the contractors cleared his throat. "Sir, if you hadn't cut in when you did, that auto switch would have burned itself out. You prevented a catastrophic cascade." "Sir." They were calling him sir. Security officers glanced between him and the COO, confusion written plainly across their faces. They'd been told he was a risk, a saboteur, a problem. Instead, the problem had been the only one who knew what to do. Even Nolan, who was always smooth, always composed, seemed thrown off balance. His mouth opened-closed, then opened again. I need a moment," he managed, and pulled his phone from his pocket with shaking fingers. Upstairs, the overhead lights flicked fully on in every wing. Monitors rebooted, machines beeped awake. A cheer rose faintly from the floors above, relief rippling room by room. But down here, the silence took on a different weight. The moment the adrenaline ebbed, the eyes turned sharper, more curious, more questioning. The head contractor stepped forward slowly. "Jack, I've rewired buildings for 30 years. I've never seen anyone diagnose a system that fast without documentation. How did you—" He broke off as if afraid to push. Jack swallowed. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I've done this before. It wasn't enough. Not for this room, not after tonight." Nolan lowered his phone. His face was pale, drawn tight around the mouth. "I think," he said carefully, "we all deserve to know exactly who you are." For the first time since he'd sprinted into the stairwell, Jack looked afraid not of consequences, but of memory. The kind that sits buried so deep, it hurts to drag into daylight. He drew a long breath. The metal panel behind him cast his reflection back in distorted streaks of silver and shadow. "I used to be an aerospace systems engineer," Jack said. "Back in Houston." The contractors exchanged looks. Security stiffened. The nurse's hand flew to her mouth. Jack kept going, voice thin but steady. I specialized in fail-safe designs and redundancy mapping, emergency power systems for launch fields, critical infrastructure. One mistake in that world, he said softly, and people die. The youngest contractor whispered, "That's why you knew. The load path?" Jack nodded. "I saw something like this once. Not here, not this building, but an overload, a shortcut, a decision made by someone who didn't understand what they were cutting into." For a moment his eyes unfocused, seeing a different fire, a different smoke, a different kind of siren screaming through metal. "I warned them," he said, "and they ignored it. No one made a sound. It cost a friend his life," Jack said. After the investigation brushed everything under the rug, I walked away. Couldn't be part of a system that cared more about budgets than people. My wife was already fighting cancer. We needed a safer life, something steady, something simpler. He looked around the room, at the pipes he'd memorized, the wires he'd traced, the building he'd loved more than any company ever deserved. I told myself I would never put my hands on a system like that again. Silence held for a beat. Maybe two. Then the head contractor whispered, "But tonight?" "Tonight," Jack said, "I didn't have a choice." Upstairs, sirens faded. Machines stabilized. Life continued. Down here, truth settled like dust after an explosion, slow, revealing, unavoidable. Nolan's voice cracked. You never said any of this. You never asked," Jack replied. The words weren't angry. They weren't bitter. They were simple, plain, and impossibly heavy. The power shift happened so fast it didn't need to be spoken. It just unfolded quiet, but complete. The COO, who had spent weeks belittling him, now stood smaller. The man who'd shut doors on him now clung to the fact that Jack had saved his hospital from disaster. Even the security officers moments ago ready to escort him out now looked as if they were guarding someone important, someone irreplaceable. The head contractor took a step closer. "If you hadn't been here," he said, voice rough, "we'd be in the dark right now. Or worse." Nolan swallowed hard. "Jack, I need your help." Those words landed like thunder. "I want a full report." Nolan continued, his voice shaking. "A complete walkthrough of what went wrong, and I want you on the review team, effective immediately." It was almost comical, the sudden shift from commanding to pleading. But no one laughed. Not after what they'd all just seen. The contractors nodded vigorously. "We need him," one said. "We're not going forward without his oversight." The charge nurse stepped in front of him. "If you hadn't fixed that circuit, we'd be planning funerals right now," she whispered. "I don't care what your badge says. You're the one I'm calling next time we need help." Jack backed up a step, overwhelmed. "I'm not looking for credit," he said quietly. "I just want the building safe." "Exactly," the nurse said. "That's why we trust you." And there it was, the thing he had given up hoping for, the respect he hadn't asked for, but had earned in the harshest possible way. The contractor stepped aside so he could approach the main console. The hum of the generator vibrated through the floor, steady, alive, obedient. But before Jack could review the logs, a voice called from the stairwell. "Dad, Caleb!" He stood halfway down the steps, rainwater dripping from his jacket, fear etched deep in his face. He must have seen the storm update on the news, must have driven here in the middle of the blackout. Jack froze, breath catching. "Caleb, what are you doing here? I saw the lights go out on the news," Caleb said, voice shaking. "Then they said the hospital lost power. I called, and your phone, Dad, I thought..." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Jack crossed the room in 3 long strides. Caleb threw his arms around him, shoulders shaking. "You're okay," the boy whispered. You're okay." Jack held on one arm around his son. The other braced against the railing because in this moment the relief felt heavier than the fear ever had. Behind them, the room watched in stunned silence. The COO lowered his eyes. The nurse wiped at hers. The contractors looked away, giving them space. Caleb stepped back, wiping his nose. "Did you fix it?" Jack managed a tired smile. "Yeah, kiddo. I fixed it." "That's my dad," Caleb said fiercely, turning to the room. "He fixes things. He always has. No arrogance, no apology, just truth. Raw, unfiltered, and undeniable." The room shifted again this time, not with shock, but with understanding. A janitor. A maintenance tech. A quiet man with a quiet life. But beneath it all, a mind built for systems resilience and second chances. Nolan cleared his throat. "Jack, I meant what I said. We need you." Jack looked at him, not angry, not triumphant, just steady. "What exactly are you asking?" Nolan swallowed. "We need someone to evaluate this system from the ground up, to lead the safety redesign, to oversee critical infrastructure from this point forward." The contractors nodded. "We'll follow your lead," one said. The nurse echoed it. "We trust you." Even the security officers chimed in with a respectful nod. Caleb looked up at his father, eyes shining with something Jack hadn't seen in a long time. "Hope." The COO pressed on. "This hospital needs someone like you at the helm, someone who understands what's at stake, someone who won't let things fall through the cracks. A job offer, a leadership role, a pivot from invisible to indispensable. But it wasn't just a promotion. It was a weight, a chance, a calling." Jack felt the shift inside him, a slow settling, like dust laying itself down after a disaster. He'd spent years hiding from the world he'd once been part of, running from the kind of responsibility that had once crushed him. Now it stood at his feet again. Only this time it was asking, not demanding. The nurse spoke softly. "You saved lives tonight. That has to mean something." Jack looked around the room, the steaming pipes, the cluttered consoles, the faces of people who finally saw him clearly. And he realized something. This wasn't Houston. This wasn't a corporation chasing deadlines. This wasn't a team ignoring red flags. This was a building filled with people he saw every day. Nurses, techs, patients, families. People who lived, breathed, trusted within these walls. People he cared about. People Caleb cared about. The storm outside growled, rattling the vents again. Jack lifted his chin. Everything had changed. And what came next was his choice. He drew in a deep breath. Then he stepped forward toward the console, toward the waiting eyes, toward the future that had just unfolded in front of him. The decision wasn't spoken yet, but it was coming. And when he made it, nothing in this hospital would ever be the same again. The storm eased before midnight, but the hospital felt different long before the clouds broke. Word traveled fast through nurses' stations, through patient families clutching styrofoam cups, through doctors who'd been moments away from losing their most fragile patients. By dawn, everyone knew the same truth. A maintenance man had saved the hospital. And not with luck, not with guesswork, with knowledge nobody else had and the courage to use it when it mattered most. When Jack stepped out of the mechanical level at sunrise, the COO was waiting for him, not with security, not with paperwork, but with something he hadn't shown once since taking the job: humility. The man looked smaller than he had the night before, the weight of his decisions carved plainly into his face. "We'll fix this," he told Jack quietly. but only if you'll help lead the way." Behind him, the head contractor nodded almost sheepishly, as though embarrassed by the assumptions he'd made earlier in the week. Nurses passing through the corridor stopped to squeeze Jack's arm, thank him, or simply look at him with new eyes. Even the overnight security officers' men who'd once been told to keep an eye on him offered a respectful nod. But the moment that meant the most was when Caleb stepped up beside his father, still damp from the rain, still shaken from the night's events. "That guy better be giving you a raise," he muttered under his breath. Jack cracked a smile. "Think he might." Later that morning, the hospital board called an emergency meeting. Jack was invited not as a witness, not as a suspect, but as an expert. Nobody questioned the title printed on his badge. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody dismissed the wiring flaw he'd warned them about weeks earlier. Instead, they listened. And when he finished explaining how the system had nearly failed and what it would take to rebuild it correctly, the chairwoman folded her hands and said, "Mr. Merrill, we'd like you to head our new Critical Systems Safety Division. Not maintenance, not facilities, not a quiet corner of the basement. Leadership. A role built around the thing he had tried so hard to bury his expertise." He didn't give them an answer that day. He wanted to take Caleb out for breakfast, let the shock of the night settle into something real. They sat in a small diner off Route 48, eating pancakes that tasted better than they had any right to. "Do you want the job?" Caleb asked between bites. Jack stared at his coffee, watching the steam rise. "I stepped away from that world for a reason," he said. "It took too much." "But this isn't Houston," Caleb replied. "This place, they need you. I saw their faces, Dad. They trust you." Jack looked at his son, the same kid who used to sit on overturned buckets in the basement workshop, legs swinging, telling him he was still a rocket scientist. Maybe courage didn't mean going back to what broke you. Maybe it meant taking the good pieces with you and leaving the rest behind. By the end of the week, he accepted the position, and for the first time in years, when he put on his work boots, he didn't feel like he was shrinking himself. He felt like he was stepping toward something that had been waiting for him. 3 months later, the hospital looked and sounded different. The new power system was fully rebuilt, guided by Jack's design, and tested with a thoroughness the contractors admitted they'd never seen before. The board funded long overdue upgrades in other wings too, this time following Jack's recommendations to the letter. Caleb volunteered with the tech team, some afternoons learning wiring basics and helping label circuit maps. The COO didn't last. After an internal review, he resigned quietly and without ceremony. His replacement met with Jack on day 1 and asked a question nobody in management had asked him before. "What do you need to make this hospital safe?" And then, miracle of miracles, she listened. Jack didn't become a suit, didn't trade in his steel-toe boots or his rolled-up sleeves. He still carried the same battered screwdriver in his pocket. Still walked the hospital at night, checking for vibrations in pipes, listening to the soft mechanical murmurs only he seemed able to hear. But now, he did it openly, with authority, with a key card that opened every door, and with a team that followed his lead without question. People greeted him in hallways by name. Kids in pediatrics waved when he passed. Even the head of neurology stopped him one day to shake his hand and say, "If you ever want to design rockets again, let me know. I'd follow you into space." He laughed it off. Rockets weren't calling him anymore. People were. One evening, months after the storm, he and Caleb stood outside the hospital, watching the new generator system cycle through a successful test, lights dimming in perfect sync, then brightening again, like the building was taking a clean, even breath. Caleb nudged him. "You proud Jack?" didn't answer right away. He watched the glow from the windows, listened to the steady hum he'd come to recognize like a heartbeat. Finally, he said, "Yeah, kiddo, I am. You think Mom would be too?" Caleb asked softly. Jack put an arm around his son's shoulders. I think she'd say I finally stopped hiding. They stood like that for a long moment. The summer air warmed the sky, settling into gold. Inside, the hospital buzzed with life machines, voices, footsteps, all running on a system built by a man who once swore he'd never carry that responsibility again. He'd taken it anyway. Not for a title, not for praise, but because when everything went dark, he was the one who still knew where the switches were. And sometimes when the world breaks in the quiet places, what it needs most is someone who knows how to bring the lights back on. In the end, that's all heroism really is. A steady voice, a sure hand, a choice made in the dark, and a willingness to walk toward the danger when everyone else is standing still.